Every time he turns around, I kind of get that feeling, oh no, he's gonna get me next.
But yet you're fascinated by him.
Very.
I'm not afraid of him. He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody.
The long and short of it was that I again knocked her unconscious and strangled her and drug her into the small grove of trees that was there.
You are the most loving woman I have ever known. You're in my mind constantly. No words can express adequately the dimensions of my feelings for you. I love you forever and ever. In my dreams, I love you with every long-hair beauty I see. I love you with every clear blue sky. I love you until my last breath. No goodbyes, just I love you. It's a letter written by Theodore Robert Bundy to his longtime girlfriend Elizabeth Cleffer, whose daughter he taught to ride a bike. He read her bedtime stories, and she loved him. She said her and her mother felt lucky that he picked them. Join Grimm today as we deep dive into the psychopath's mind, exploring his fetishes for necrophilia and cannibalism, and how he maintained a loving relationship with family and friends.
Ted Bundy is an articulate, intelligent 42-year-old man, a former Boy Scout, law student, and Republican Party activist.
We follow his multiple prison escapes and manhunts, and follow the true crime story of the most terrifying psychopath for which the words serial killer were literally invented.
I just said that the Hawkins girl's head was severed and taken up the road about 25 to 50 yards and buried in a location about 10 yards west of the road on a rocky hillside.
You're listening to Grim Explicit Histories, grim topics, extreme dark histories, folklore, and the paranormal for mature audiences. We keep it real, we keep it educational, thought-provoking, like a motherfucker. I'm Joe Wojie, and this is Grim.
I was found here. You come around here.
Welcome, friends, my beautiful motherfuckers of the macabre, back to Grim, your podcast for dark histories, folklore, anthropology, and true crime. We are historians Joe Wojie, Britnee Smith, and Ted Sisco here on this first Serial Killer Sunday, where we occasionally psychoanalyze the most interesting psychopathic killers that we can find. So before we start on maybe his formative years and what I think was a completely unhealthy and complex obsession with his real first girlfriend, Diane Edwards, God damn, this Donna Schramm serial killer profiler. You guys have read about this, right? Brittany, you've read about Donna Schramm, the profiler that was tasked along with a FBI psychologist to find this killer?
Yes, I do recognize the name from talking about when they were out in, what was it, Washington, when they were...
They worked for the crime prevention unit, right? It was a unit of Seattle police.
Yeah, because Ted Bundy actually, briefly worked for the Seattle Crime Commission, in which he had, all this type of access to law enforcement and statistics and basically crime going on in Seattle. And it's also important to note, though, by the way, that serial killer as a term did not exist at that time.
Until fucking Ted Bundy, right?
Yeah, so at the time, serial killer is not even a term that existed.
And this motherfucker was a crime fighter. He volunteered for a suicide prevention hotline. He worked. Ezra Stoutland, the director of actually that program, that crime prevention program, had Ted Bundy to dinner at his house a bunch of times. His daughter was absolutely smitten with him. He told Donna Schramm, actually, that he secretly hoped his 16-year-old daughter would marry somebody exactly like Ted Bundy.
Right, and I think that goes to kind of how all the different interviews, how all the different documentaries, the articles, everything kind of goes back to the idea that Ted Bundy, despite being a awful, horrific serial killer and an awful human being in general, was also this extremely charismatic individual who charmed men and women, and people were in love with him. They trusted him. He had the good looks going for him.
He had fangirls
for the
in
time
court.
period. He had a weird unibrow, which I think is odd that nobody ever comments on.
But it's crazy. Like, if fucking Dirty Sanchez stole my hubcaps, I would have more disdain for that motherfucker than Ted Bundy, who hacksawed motherfuckers' heads off and fucked them in their eye sockets, right? Because he was charismatic.
Yeah,
and
because
he
even at the
made
end,
you feel
during
good.
his murder trials, when people are like, we have evidence that this man brutally murdered and raped these young women, people are still writing him love letters and are in love with him, and they were just like, no, like, we love Ted Bundy. And it's like, there is actual concrete evidence that this man has murdered and raped and done a bunch of awful, awful things to their
fucking
corpses.
necrophilia.
Yes. Like,
hanging out with the corpse to get a connection personally with it.
Right. Like, it's one thing, at least with these early people in Seattle, before he's become known, before there's any evidence that this man, you can almost kind of understand he's hiding it, so they don't know yet. But towards the end of his serial killer career, where that this man has done this, and you still are proclaiming that you're in love with him, that's two very different stories, and one of them is way more alarming than the other. And I definitely think the latter is the more alarming.
And without getting too far ahead of ourselves, because we're gonna back up and we're gonna do his formative years and all that stuff. But do you remember the one fucking girl when he went and killed not the whole sorority house, but he probably wanted to kill the whole sorority house. He goes and fucking attacks 5 women, and he's bringing the girl that lived across the hall from him out to dinner.
Wait. So he's down in Florida, right? So
and she's all googly-eyed for him, and they're like, so this motherfucker just killed all these women down the street, but you had dinner with him, and she's all bashful looking, well, he didn't kill me, he must have liked me more.
I was gonna say, so yeah, he was staying in a boarding house. It was I think the week before the murders at the sorority house.
The Or is what it was called.
Yeah, so he's staying there, and apparently, there's an interview, you can actually see the tape, of the owner of the boarding house. Basically, he took her out to dinner the one night, and when they obviously the news reporters go back and interview them, and they're like, hey, this man is suspected of being the murderer of the sorority house nearby. And yeah, it's very bizarre, he did. And it's almost kind of
And they're like, but you went out to dinner with him.
But she's hardly the only person who comes off like that in these different videos from the 70s when they're talking about Ted Bundy.
Swooning over him, it's in their eyes.
Yeah, and she's hardly the only one. There are all these individuals on these tapes, and it's videotapes where you can actually physically see them, where they're almost kind of yeah, but he's still and it's no.
He fooled everybody, from his professors to his friends to people at church. He was hanging out. He was buddies with the director of his church. He got baptized as an adult.
Right, that's the Mormon church. So that's when he leaves Washington and he goes down to Utah. Yeah, he's kind of putting together a new life and is getting ready to go on a new spree of murdering women. And he decides to join the Mormon church, so he gets baptized. And they're all yeah, he's an upstanding individual. And apparently at one of the early trials, they write him cards and they're we stand, with you, and you're a great person, Ted, and all this other stuff. And then obviously when he gets found guilty of some of the lesser crimes out there, they do excommunicate him in
he was excommunicated.
Yeah, he was excommunicated.
You can't be a Mormon if you cut motherfuckers' heads off.
Yeah,
just let it be known out there in our grim audience.
Well, it wasn't
if
even,
you want to join the Mormon church, you may not kill motherfuckers. It's not okay.
There are limits.
Yeah, well, he's not. So he's only a Mormon for 2 years, because he moves to Salt Lake City in Utah in 1974, and he gets excommunicated in 1976. So it's a very short window, and it's not even the murder crimes that get him excommunicated. No. It's the kidnapping.
Attempted kidnapping.
It's the attempted kidnapping that gets him excommunicated. So after that, they were all right, well, not you.
And his girlfriend Liz, right? He's got this girlfriend for 4 years, right? And when not to get ahead of ourselves again. All right, we are getting ahead of ourselves. All right. So cut the Liz stuff out. Let's just. I think we should probably just take it from the beginning, right? From this point.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
All right. Let me.
Ted, did you want to jump in and kind of?
No, I just want to mention, when you're saying that the good looks and everything, that was what he had going for him. Nobody believed, because the belief was that if you're this kind of killer, that you don't look. You have you're always trained that the people like this are they look the part. He was the first one that
he's charismatic. Yeah. He's a law student. Yeah, he has an intelligent.
He's working for the Republicans out in Washington, and they're
he's working for the gubernatorial. during the gubernatorial race there. He's got a
Governor
degree
Evans.
in psychology, so he understands people.
Yeah, so he's like absolutely this put together guy.
Even when they had a sketch of him in Washington and a sketch of his car, the police still said, nah, it can't be him. I'm like, motherfucker, you had like this police sketch. You had his girlfriend saying, I think he's the one that did it.
Well, that's what I was. That's about what I was going to get at, right?
Yeah, Liz calls and it's like,
I think I got your guy.
I think it's him. And
then she still wants to go to Utah with the guy, and he won't take her.
No.
But they do a sketch of him, and because he's going to the Lake Sammamish, and all of a sudden he sees like 6,000 hot girls walking around. It's like porn walking around on two legs, and he can't help himself but to grab two of them. And he's like, "Hi, I'm Ted. Hi, I'm Ted. Can I kidnap you? Can you get in my VW bug, please?
You want to come see my sailboat?"
And then the headlines read the next day: "Police seek Ted." Disappearance of women.
And that's how he would like at least with that one too. Like he usually used this whole like injury ruse where like he had an arm in a sling and he's like, "Can you help me?" And of course, like most of these young girls,
he's not asking guys. He's asking hot young girls. "Can you help me? Can I please kidnap you?"
500-pound thing. Can you help me lift this, please?
But his girlfriend sees the police sketch that they do. It looks just like him. He's driving that VW Bug. His name is fucking Ted. She looks at it. One of her friends at work says she turns fucking white. She's like, fuck. She shows her girlfriend, and her girlfriend is like, fuck. Let's call the Ted Bundy hotline. I mean, they don't know it's the Ted Bundy hotline, but they call.
Yeah.
They call, and they're like, "Yo, does he wear his watch on his right wrist?" And they're like, "Yeah." And it's anonymous, the phone call. And she's like, "Fuck, can I go to Utah with you, please?" Like, she still doesn't do shit with it.
There's so many parts of like the early parts of his, serial killer career per se, where it's just like, you're like, how did you not get caught yet? Because like there's just so many alarming parts that like, and obviously it's important to remember, of course, that this is the 60s and the 70s, that law enforcement did not have nearly as many tools as they have today. Like there's no DNA. The term serial killer is not even invented yet. That's
Until him.
Exactly. I mean, but you also like, it's just even like they're typewriting things, so you can't even get information between departments is not happening. I mean, there's
that's what he exploits because he knows this
because he worked with the commission, so he knows. Yeah,
he read detective novels. He was just like, they don't share information.
They don't,
and I'm just going to cross state lines and jurisdictional lines, and I'll be safe.
Yeah, so there's so many things to remember on the law enforcement side that, like, when you're listening, you're like, what the shit? Like, how did you not know? That, like, how did you fail?
How do you not, like, put two and two together?
Exactly.
Well, one of the things with the hotline,
they don't have the tools or the background. Like, this is a totally new thing that is happening to them. And they're just kind of, obviously they're not, because you can imagine, like, today, like, DNA evidence, like they would have just put like the bolt, like it would have been.
They got fucking cameras all over the place now.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, so now you're not going to get away with shit. Google fucking listens to us.
It's a very different situation, so it's important to remember that too.
Not only that, his girlfriend Liz found his murder kit. Found all the tools he used to murder the women, and she asked him about it. And he's like, "Oh, the crowbar that was there in case I get a flat tire. Oh, the rope that's there to help me do this." And he totally explained everything, and she fell for it.
And he used to work for a medical supply place, and he boosted he was a klepto too, and he boosted all of this medical shit, including like plaster of Paris and crutches and all that shit. And it said that he was walking up with crutches, and she saw crutches like there too, and she's like, "Oh fuck," and he's got that too. Like she totally. I mean, and he said to her like at the end of all this, like, "Didn't you know it was me?"
Well, she like calls in. Doesn't she call in more than once? Like,
she does, and they have no fucking clue who she is.
She
the second time,
more than once.
She even meets with them. She insists that they meet with her, and they do. They ask her like about her sex life and shit like that, and then she calls back, and they have no clue like who she is. But the thing is, I mean, I guess in the defense of the police department, tons of people were calling in on their boyfriends. All of these girls thought that their boyfriends were serial killers, and were like, it's my boyfriend. She calls in, and it's just another girl that thinks it's her boyfriend. Of course, it looks like him. It's his.
Well, that's the alarm.
It looks like him. His name is Ted.
All of these other people called in. His abnormal psychology professor called in and was like, "Fuck, that's Ted. That's Ted. Nobody's named Ted, and that guy is." And he said when they interviewed him, they were like, what did you think about him? And he said, "Oh, he seemed totally normal. He actually put me at ease." Like in a sea of hippie sort of, people that were protesting and wanted me to give free grades out. He was the only one that wanted order, and he made me, the abnormal psych professor, feel comfortable. And they were like, well, it couldn't have been him. Look, he's in the Republican Party. He's going to fucking law school. He's got a psych degree. They were more interested.
They couldn't believe that like this young, well put together, like, you know, intelligent young man would be, also a white man would be like the person who's doing all these savage
He dressed nice. He wore a tweed
like write him
coat.
off.
He
They're like,
smiled.
Not him.
That can't be him.
Can't be him.
He boosted a lot of clothes. He would go to high-end stores. Liz, his girlfriend, when he interviewed her, she was like, yeah, I know he aspired for more, and he would like basically couldn't afford the clothes, so he would like dress nice in what he had, and then he would go like boost clothes from the fucking store to bring them out of the loading dock. But he aspired to a lot more, basically like a case of arrested development in a lot of ways. But I think it is really important that we kind of flesh out his formative years growing up when he was a kid. And he didn't necessarily have any personal connections. He never had any girlfriends. He never had any really close friends. He didn't go out hanging out, in his own words, drinking with the boys because, well, he wasn't friends with too many people. He didn't go out for sports. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't cool. And some of the people that they had interviewed later about him said that it was almost a shame because he was a good looking guy. And his childhood, it was almost like some Beaver Cleaver shit because, you know, his family had them involved in the Cub Scouts, the Brownies, church camps. And even at church camp, I mean, they would make fun of him. He had a speech impediment. He didn't have many friends then. He would lash out with like a temper a bit. Prison psychologist in Utah, he was suspected of these serial killings. So what they did was go out and interview people from his past. And there was one girl that said he tried to drown her. He would lash out and do these things that would draw a red flag. People said that he had a dark side, and basically the prison psychologist was like, no parole for you, motherfucker. You will hurt somebody. But they looked into it because he hadn't been convicted of murder yet, and it was a attempted kidnapping charge.
Right, so they were basically, I remember that. They were debating whether or not he should get parole, and like he wouldn't if he was found to be like a threat to, you know, society if he was released. So they wanted to kind of confirm whether or not people that he had known previously, whether they thought he would hurt somebody if they let him out on parole. And obviously to us, that's kind of weird because we're like, it's Ted Bundy. So yeah, he's gonna hurt a whole bunch of people. But like,
we have hindsight. There were people
they don't know that yet. So they're like,
that defended him. Lots of people from the church, from his past, people flew out there from Washington to try to sit by his side. How can we convince these people that he is innocent? And some of the newspapers even said, you know, his acquaintances say he's a really nice guy. Yeah, because they don't know yet with hard evidence that that's obviously all fake. But so this goes back even further. I mean, if we go back to his birth, right? He's born November 24th, 1946 as Theodore Robert Colwell. And he is an illegitimate child. Actually, he doesn't know who his father is. He finds his birth certificate at one point, and it says father unknown. And they think that that's when he started to act out. He thought originally his mother was his sister, and that it was speculated his grandfather actually had been his father, which I think you guys had read, one of you guys had read the DNA testing. They did something to find out that it probably wasn't the case. They did testing with, I think, Bundy's blood and his grandfather, or they said that if somebody's a victim of incest, they share certain types of, in their DNA, there's certain connections in their DNA, and that they didn't have the connection. So they don't believe his grandfather actually was the real father. So right, but just the idea that potentially your grandfather is actually your biological father. Yeah, and that's what he was told as a young child. He grew up, the formative years, grew up thinking that his grandfather was his father, his grandmother was his mother, and his mother was actually his sister. That's what he grew up thinking. Yeah, because he was born at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers up in Vermont. And apparently he spent his first 3 months there because his mother was going to leave him there. But basically her parents were like, no, you have to go and get the child. So she did. She went and got Bundy, or Ted at this point. And she returned home to their home actually in Roxborough, Pennsylvania. Yeah. So for our Philadelphia listeners, it was in Roxborough that his mother, Louise, and her parents, his grandparents, lived at the time. And so Ted spent his first 3 years here in Roxborough, Pennsylvania, living, like you said, with his grandparents. And there was the idea that they were his parents, and his mom, Louise, was his older sister. And so
He definitely had as a child, he was treated like he was unwanted. I mean, that's basically how they.
Yeah, and I heard that there was, or not heard, but I saw different documentaries and articles where they were saying that his grandfather was also abusive to other members in the family, like not just Ted, but also to other members in the family.
And in the home as well, they didn't they thought that it was a good thing not to actually give the babies attention and touch them. And so I know we, just to give her a shout out, we have a psychologist who actually put together an outline and tried to assist us in a lot of ways, Jennifer Murphy, with the organization of this in a psychological kind of perspective. And what she had given us is that the babies were not touched and that it would have caused them some detrimental harm to their future development.
Yeah, they didn't realize what harm they were doing by not touching the baby, especially right after it's being born. The baby needs that connection, especially to the mother. And because it was lacked the connection with the mother, especially the first 3 months when the mother went back to Roxborough and he's up there all alone.
Right in Vermont.
And they're not giving him any attention or any affection. They said that could have been a factor in leading to what he eventually became. So you can imagine they didn't want him even before he was born, let alone after he was fucking born.
Well, the stigma on an unmarried woman having
a child. Remember, it's 1946. So.
Yeah, a child out of wedlock.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a major stigma for a young woman to have in society, especially at this time.
And you got to think, how's that going to fuck you up as far as your mom didn't want to be your mom?
Right. Well, if he knows that, that could be.
They try to abort you, and then they left you to fuck at the
and then she doesn't want to admit that you're her child. I mean, that's got to fuck with you somehow.
Well, he starts to commit petty crimes. Actually, he got his record expunged. He was stealing shit. He was
that's
burglary, auto theft.
Yeah, because at 3 he moves out. They move out from Roxborough, Pennsylvania, out to Washington State. So
but you know
3,
why?
Yes, I did see some. I saw some of the rumors as to why.
Was it the knife incident?
It freaked Eddie out.
Ted, do you want to tell us what Ted did that got him kicked out of Roxborough, Pennsylvania?
For all murderous purposes today, Ted Sisco will be playing the part of Ted Bundy.
And namesake only. No, apparently 3 years old, he went down to the kitchen, gathered up all the knives in the house, and went up to where his aunt or sister,
Aunt Julia,
was sleeping, and he put
and he was like, "Fuck you, Aunt Julia."
Yeah, and he lined up all the knives facing inward where she's sleeping around the bed. So when she woke up, all these knives are pointing at her while she wakes up. That's
a weird story.
And they know
he did it. Exorcism shit.
They know he did it because they saw him in a doorway when she woke up, and she's like,
But it's also what 3-year-old is capable of carrying all the knives upstairs and laying them all out without once actually cutting yourself,
harming themselves, right?
I mean, it's definitely a creepy story, but I also am just can a 3-year-old actually do that?
I'm sure it probably wasn't all the knives, but it was probably a good amount.
Hey, if it's
one
just
knife is
that's still messed up. So, so whatever happens, some weird shit goes down, and they're you need to leave.
Yeah.
So they move out to Washington.
Get this kid out of here.
I don't care where you go, you just gotta get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, so he moves out to Washington and
starts being a peeping Tom in ladies' windows. So Bundy has no girlfriends in high school, no close friends as a kid, goes off after he graduates high school to the University of Washington. He studies psychology, and when he's a freshman, as soon as he gets there, he starts to date Diane Marjorie Jean Edwards. Now, she's a rich girl from California, and really sort of molds him from this point. It's his first love. He's, in his own words, angry at her, basically for severing the ties there. I mean, I'm sure she broke
up with him.
Yeah, she broke his heart. It was his first love, and he was devastated. Basically, she just goes home, writes him less and less, and she's graduated already. He's not up to the sort of socioeconomic level that her family and expectations are. She affects him in a big way because it gives him a drive to succeed and be like her, be like that. Dresses nice, talks nice, tries to surround himself with the right people, who he sees as the right people. Really gets ambition to go to law school after he graduates, to join into politics, which would be perfect for him because he's articulate and he can tell people what they want to hear based on who they are, different groups. But as far as his heart is concerned, this is his first love, man. She breaks his fucking heart and really sort of molds him. When psychologists have looked at, his relationship with her, it seems to really have molded what he becomes in the future, not only for his ambitions, but for his emotional state of being. And I mean, quite possibly every single girl that he murders after this, it's all Diane. He murders Diane over and over. Not to say that he hates her completely, because he loves her. He hates her for breaking his heart.
So Ted, as an adolescent, as we were talking about, you mentioned earlier, Joe, how he had basically committed some different petty crimes and things like that, but they get all expunged because he's a minor, so it's, off the record and stuff. He graduates from high school in 1965. He, decides to attend university, gets into the University of Puget Sound. He's there for about a year before he transfers to the University of Washington. Originally, I believe it was to study Chinese. So he's there as an undergrad student, and he basically, this is when he kind of meets Diane or Stephanie Brooks, as she's also sometimes commonly referred to as.
It's her alias, right?
Yeah, her alias. And like you said, she's
sake.
this upper class kind of woman from California, and she's basically looking, because it's the 60s. So like she's looking, as her family expects, for an ambitious young man who are, they're going to get married.
Who has a future.
Who has a future, yeah. And basically from, what has been written, Ted at this point does not meet that. He doesn't quite have any of the ambitions. And obviously he's just emotionally immature. And so she basically breaks up with him. She's like, no, you're not it.
And he pulls himself up by his bootstraps because his next girlfriend says, he's very together. We strive to be like him. And he seemed more mature than he was.
Well, yeah, no. So, I mean, it's obviously this is a big deal for him that he got dumped from his first love. So because he did apparently, by all the articles and records, he loved her. And so it's a big deal for him that she basically ends this relationship with him. He drops out of college. He ends up working a series of minimum wage jobs. He ends up volunteering for the Seattle office of Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign. He's working for as a bodyguard during another campaign up in Washington State. He, basically he's doing these different political events in which he's getting to know people. He's seeing how you can dress yourself, how to talk in that type of society. He ends up basically, going traveling further east. He actually comes back to Philadelphia. He does a semester here in Philly at Temple University. He's here for Temple's spring semester in 1969. So he's here at Temple and Philly and stuff. And then he basically, travels back to Washington for the fall of 1969, where he re-enrolls in the University of Washington, by mid-1970. So he's back up there in the fall. Following year, he's attending back at the university, but this time as a psychology major. And it's around this time that he also meets kind of his second important girlfriend, and this is Liz.
So he meets Liz actually at the Sandpiper Bar on campus. She's really shy. She's pretty. She's really shy. She's pretty. She had rushed a lot of sororities, none of which had given her a bid. She's from this Mormon family. She's taught Mormon values that women are to be basically subservient and to serve their I guess not boyfriends, but husbands, and to be mothers. And I guess he likes that about her, but he's also shy too. She, when he went in the bar, had to talk to him. She wanted to talk to him. And they danced, and then he wouldn't ask her to dance again. So she had to go talk to him again. And they go home together because she drank a little too much. Yeah. And he didn't try to kiss her, let alone get her clothes off.
No.
She slept just with her clothes on, but she had a child with somebody
she was
else.
divorcee. Yeah, she divorced her first husband,
who she met on campus there, and he was younger than her. And Bundy winds up becoming more of a dad to her daughter than the dad was.
The story was she wakes up the next morning after having Bundy over, and she doesn't know where he is. He's gone. And then she goes to check on her daughter. Her daughter's gone. And then she goes out in the kitchen. That's where he's cooking the daughter breakfast and everything else. He has an apron on. He's cooking breakfast like a
nice guy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what led her to sit there and say, I like this guy. He's actually cooking for my daughter and everything else. So
the word she used, he was endearing.
Endearing.
Ted Bundy was endearing.
Oh, boy.
And he moved right into the family with them. Basically, it was the best thing. It was what she had always hoped for, is what she said. Exactly what she wanted.
Yeah, like a nice guy who is in school.
Must be the name.
Oh, is it Ted? It's the name.
Don't worry, Britt. Walking out to the car, you're totally good.
Oh, thanks, Ted. Thanks.
I have my sling over here.
Thanks. I'm definitely going to trust any man who approaches me with the name Ted.
Yeah.
Let me tell you.
I'll cook you breakfast.
Jesus.
He'll take you home in his VW bug.
There's no
This right here is
paint
why
your
women don't
fingernails.
trust men.
There's no passenger seat. Don't worry about that. Where we're going, you don't need a
Put
passenger
these handcuffs
seat.
on, please.
And we'll explain the whole passenger seat
And don't
too,
speak
by the
to
way.
me, or I will lose my resolve.
Well, there's not really much to discuss with Liz.
Other than he kills the girl down the street from her.
Yeah.
They come an inch from getting married. Actually, they went down and got themselves a marriage certificate that he got cold feet on because why was that, Britney?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons might have been because, he graduated with his psych degree, and that's fine and everything. He's talking about law school and going to become like a law student. And also around 1973, when he's dating Liz, he's also going to rekindle his relationship with Diane or Stephanie Brooks, and they go back to dating. She flies out from California to meet with him as he's working on these different, political campaigns for governor and the presidential race and things like that.
Look how impressive I've become.
Exactly. And he drags her to, or not drags, but he brings her to these different political events, and he introduces her apparently at least once as his fiance, and they discuss marriage too. And meanwhile, this is why he's also simultaneously dating Liz. So neither woman knows about the other. He's obviously in kind of these emotionally deep relationships with both women, but and then he's doing all this.
They think it's emotionally deep, at least.
Right, exactly. They think that and everything. And, anybody who's meeting them, would think, oh, this is a beautiful young couple who, are getting ready to get married. And, then all of a sudden, he basically just breaks it off with Stephanie Brooks in 1974, just stops contacting her, dumps her for all intents and purposes, almost as if he was like, hey, so I've, like you said, put myself all together. I'm involved in all these political campaigns. I'm a law student.
Everything you wanted is what I now am, and then, I don't need you.
Yeah.
And then he dumps her, almost in a retaliation.
About it.
Yeah, he is. It's incredibly immature, and he just dumps her, and that's how that relationship ends. Which I'm sure, retrospectively, she's like, thank God. But
Ted Bundy dumped me. Fuck, thank God. And I got to go back to California alive.
Yeah, so worked out for her.
And this is probably around the time where he starts his murder spree, actually. And when you look at how serial killing begins, they usually start at an area they're familiar with. And just like that, Ted Bundy, his first couple of victims, one is a block from him and one is a block from his girlfriend Liz's house. And the very first of them, Karen Epley, he bashes her over the head. He conks her over the head with a bed frame and then, basically fucks her with the bed frame. She lived, had brain damage, and I think she's basically the only victim to live until the very end when he attacks the sorority house and multiple women get bashed who he probably thought were all dead. He probably thought that Karen Epley was dead as well. But a month later, he then goes and attacks Linda Healy, who people usually say is his first victim because she's the first to die.
Murder victim, yeah.
She's at least the first known murder victim.
She was on the fucking radio, man. I mean, she was a college student, but she did the weather reports on the radio and the ski reports on the radio, and people knew who she was, and she just disappears. It's the fucking news lady disappears.
Yeah, and everybody was kind of surprised because, by all accounts, she was this responsible young woman who was always there for work. And then, like you said, she just vanishes. And everybody's like, where'd she go? What
and they don't take it seriously either. I mean, not as a murder case. They're just like, oh, she shacked up maybe with a guy and left. No, she's the fucking weather girl. Why would she do that? And she was a good student. And they interviewed the people that knew her, and they were like, no, this is not like her. She doesn't do that. She's responsible. And from this point, Bundy starts to leave for 3 days at a time, Liz says. And this is the craziest shit about it. Everything that we know about psychopathic Ted Bundy killing women in a killing spree across the country that's beginning now. He disappears for days at a time. He fucks up school. He has to drop out of school. And his girlfriend starts to fight with him. She's picking fucking fights with him, screaming at him. And the craziest part about it is just picture Ted Bundy, who is literally cutting these women's heads off, spending days at a time with corpses, dressing them up, doing their fingernails with nail polish, bringing their heads back to his apartment with him. And this psychopathic killer has a girlfriend who's bitching and screaming at him. And she said, and it coincides with his killings beginning. She says that every time she started to bitch and scream at him, basically she thought he was cheating on her, and he would disappear for a couple of days.
He had, so that's fair.
He was cheating on her with some corpses, but
and he hadn't cheated on her earlier too.
Yeah.
So I mean,
he would get quiet. He would get the opposite of mad and violent. I guess in his head, knowing what he could do, he would calm down. And it's crazy to think that a murderous psychopath, there was somebody who could scream in his face and he would take it, and he would do her dishes and run the vacuum cleaner to make her happier, to try to smooth it over. Is what he said.
Wonder if that had anything to do with her child, though. If you looked at that saying, if I do that to her, that leaves her alone. Maybe that was some sort of rationalization, like I can't do that to her because her daughter would be left alone. Just my guess.
I'm thinking, like in my analysis of him, is that people can be drug addicts. They could drink a fifth of whiskey or put a needle in their arm or spank it to Pornhub for an hour, a little too much or something, and have an obsessive compulsive need to do these things like an addiction or just something you're obsessed with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you forget that there are, that you have a mother or a girlfriend that you love and that you need to pay your rent or go to the grocery store and do these things to make you responsible. It's just another facet of your life. And to him, he connected this stuff to pornography at the very end, though I think it was more than sex to him. It was definitely sex because he would bite women. One of his things is that he loved to bite these women, usually when they were dead. But he would leave his teeth marks. That's actually how he got convicted. But he was definitely into the sex part of it, but it was more than that. It was connection with these corpses, and he would break all their jaws. One thing he said when they interviewed him at the end, that he would lose his resolve if they spoke to him because he would look at them as a real person, and he didn't want to do that. This was fantasy. This was fetish. He had a fetish, and he traces it back to just images that you see in the supermarket magazines then it's got to go further with Playboy and nothing. It has to go further and further and further. And this was the most sickest extreme expression of that is sex with corpses, cut their fucking heads off, fuck them in their eye sockets.
I was say with the pornography thing that he trots that out literally the afternoon before his execution, and he does it, and he claims that it's the pornography was the cause of this to James Dobson, who is a psychologist and a founder of a Christian evangelical group called Focus on the Family, and he's also a known anti-pornography advocate, and so pretty much almost
he goes all over that.
So almost all of Ted Bundy's biographers, researchers, and investigators, people who were there at the time, they're like, this is just another manipulation.
Ploy,
it's another tactic. It wasn't pornography because in all these different interviews with law enforcement and psychologists before Dobson, he's always nah, the pornography wasn't the cause of it. I looked at it, but I also looked at true crime. It was another.
He's a complex guy, and he's definitely got complexities. And when you listen to him talk, he does say hey man, I don't have multiple personalities. I am a normal, regular guy. And he says that psychologists always like to have a definitive moment, he was beat as a kid, this made that happen, this led to this, that led to that, and that there's not always a straightforward answer, and there's not one with him, and there's not one with other people too, as much as that might confound psychologists. He likened it, I don't know, it was more, to me, it's sort of was reminiscent of Taoism, I don't know if that was what his intention was to portray it as, but what he said was a river. This is how Ted Bundy says, a river is created by a whole bunch of melting snow all coming together, and there are different molecules and there are different factors in our lives that all lead to this happening, but it could be 1,000 different things all coming together to make it happen. So it's not necessarily straightforward he was possessed by pornography to do this, but that there were a lot of factors. And I personally, I think it was a fetish to him, because he would do it more and more and more and try to keep these women alive longer as well. The 17-year-old police chief's daughter, they think then that was like a later one.
That was in Utah, I think.
Yeah, she was alive for like a week. Like he kept her alive a little longer. I think just because he would have to get another girl, like as soon as she decomposed to the point where he wasn't going to have any pleasure by laying with this corpse decomposing. He kept her alive for like a week.
You can definitely see how the obsession starts to like grow more and more predominant in his life though, because like what starts out is just, I think he admitted that I think it was he like killed them originally just to get rid of the evidence after he had raped them and everything. And then it develops into no, I need to kill them. Like the killing part is
I got into the killing and now I'm into that.
Yeah. And it just keeps escalating further and further as he, continues to rape and murder and commit these awful crimes.
It seemed like he wanted to do it. Well, at least he did it. A lot of the victims are spaced out, at least the early ones, about a month apart. And then it progresses where you got 3 of them in the same month. And he probably wanted to just always at all times have some lifeless girl who couldn't talk back to him. He could do whatever he wanted with her and consume parts of their bodies. Part of that was cannibalism for him in addition to necrophilia.
I didn't know about cannibalism.
I was because I didn't know about the cannibalism part, the necrophilia part.
Necrophilia.
He said that it was a way for him to possess them more, to consume them.
So metaphorically?
Well, it would
literally
be
too.
taking it in. And I could
Good.
I could
another.
only,
That's not associated with Ted.
Right.
I can only guess that it was probably their private parts, but I don't know because I didn't read what specific parts that he would eat, but he said that he ate parts of them.
Okay, so if he's telling the truth of that, then that's just
If he's
another
telling the
awful
truth.
atrocity that he committed. Great, because
Add that to the
obviously Ted Bundy was also a serial liar.
Serial, well, yeah.
Not with his name, though.
No, his name, no. That's not.
Told everybody his name. So out of these 36 or 38 victims that we know for sure that he's killed, the one that really puts people onto him is Georgianne Hawkins. After Georgianne Hawkins disappears, then they're like, oh, wait a minute. There's a pattern here that we can identify. And about 5 weeks after Georgianne Hawkins' disappearance in Seattle, on July 14th, 1974, Bundy goes to Lake Sammamish. Now, this is what fucks it up for him because he sees all these girls walking around just like pornography with 2 legs, and he can't help himself but to grab 2 of them. So he grabs Janice Ott and Denise Naslin, but he's walking up to everybody. Hi, I'm fucking Ted. My name is Ted. And so many people hear him say that it winds up getting into the paper. And this is what gets him in trouble. I guess, I don't know, his greed that he needed 2 of them. And he stashes...
That growing addiction.
Yeah.
Growing obsession.
Stashes the bodies. Basically, there's a lot of wilderness out there. And right outside Lake Sammamish is where they find not only those 2 women, but other women too. And he would cut their heads off. The craziest shit that he would fucking do is the fact that I guess that he couldn't bring an entire body home with him, but a head was small enough that he could bring home. And just wrap your mind around what he's doing to these women. You could see horror movies and it's a little bit more abstract because it's not real, right? It's on TV. It's on your computer screen or something like that. But just imagine taking a fucking hacksaw from the Home Depot and sawing somebody's head off. I mean, the blood that had been there, there's no DNA testing until 1987, so he's totally free from, having to worry about DNA evidence or anything like that. But, I mean, he's sawing these women's heads off, bringing them home, I guess because he could put them in a bowling ball bag or a knapsack or something, and going back to the headless corpse over and over, having sex with them, the headless corpse, and at home, he's keeping the head for a week at a time, doing their makeup, doing their hair, bringing them in the tub with him, to clean them up and everything. I mean, I don't know. So Ted Bundy over here is on our show. What kind of makeup would you use? Something hydrating, I guess, some Maybelline or
maybe like a
L'Oreal?
light rouge color, maybe.
What the fuck?
nothing too light. I mean, they're
No.
going pale.
It's fucking extreme.
They're getting paler anyway, so nothing too light. I want to brighten it up a little bit.
Jesus. Sorry, it's not as...
You never thought about that?
No, I can't say I ever thought about that unless it's the nightmare of what some creepy dude is going to do to me. In
your
that
head.
case, yeah, worst case scenarios of how I'm going to die, maybe, but
Yeah.
not in a
And out of the 3 people in this room right now, there's only one person that would be at risk if Ted Bundy was in this room now.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to lay with me, and he didn't want to do Ted's hair,
No.
and he didn't want to put fingernail polish on me and lay with my lifeless corpse.
Yeah, I got that.
It's all you,
He
Britt.
had a
It's
total
all you, Britt.
type of person. He wanted
Young,
long
beautiful.
hair, beautiful, usually educated.
college. It's
Yeah.
usually college age young women who he was targeting most of the time.
So let's not seance that motherfucker with Britney in the room.
Hop a shotgun.
Somebody's
Don't
in
become
trouble.
possessed by him.
Yeah, let's not do that, Ted.
But you know what he did that was pretty nice? He re-gifted all of the dead women's jewelry to his girlfriend.
Yeah. Hey.
That's
Waste not
terrifying.
wanting that. They're not going to need it anymore.
It's terrifying.
It's fucking absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, so these 2 cases that happen at the lake. I mean,
That's
this
big.
is what really starts to bring him into the awareness of law enforcement.
This gets all the phone calls.
Yeah, because like now they're like, well, we know, like we heard a guy named Ted approaching these women, and like this is when
They're actually checking people's cameras because a lot of people because of the vacation spot. So
Right,
people
it was
go
a
there.
festival and everything, so people
and
were
they're
taking
checking
photos.
their cameras and their videos and everything else.
There were
saying, hey,
40,000 people there that day. They estimate there was a lot of people, and all of those people, you would think that he could have blended in a little bit better. I mean, why couldn't he just said my name was
Well, that's where they got the police
Tom or
sketch.
Juan or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they got the police sketch.
Yeah.
Of what
But
he
it
looked
said
like.
Ted.
Yeah. Why would,
sought
exactly.
by
Why would you use your
police.
real name?
He's going to cut their fucking heads off. He
Yeah.
could tell a fib.
Yeah.
My name is John.
Yeah.
Hi. My name's Ted Sisco.
Well, I mean, as we talked about, it's not like law enforcement put it together as much as we would want them to, obviously, despite having the sketch and the name and like knowing an individual named Ted. And this is when Liz starts calling and being like, hey, so that sketch does look sort
Yeah.
of similar to my boyfriend, and he's also named Ted.
And he drives a VW Bug, and
he disappears for days at a time.
But he
I don't
still
know what he's
feels
doing.
Yeah.
a sense of responsibility, because when Liz's parents come, it's usually in Mormon practice to baptize your children at age 8. And when Liz's daughter Molly was getting baptized at age 8 and her parents flew in, he had just killed Carol Ball, and he was up all night with her fucking corpse and shows up at the baptism. He was a couple hours late, but he shows up. It was his responsibility to show up, and he does. And he took her parents out for pizza the night before, kills a girl that night, and then goes back to the baptism. I mean, this is his like sense of responsibility, and he still has somebody to love and tell him to do the dishes.
I do dishes as well, Brett.
Oh, that's great.
We know that you do
I
dishes.
do my own dishes. Thank you. Don't need any help with that.
And I can cook.
Nope. That's what takeout's for.
I'm a beast with that hacksaw.
Hell no.
When Bundy first started killing, it kind of messed him up in school because he became preoccupied with it. And he winds up messing up in school. He gets into the University of Utah Law School, goes out there without his girlfriend, Liz. Liz was hoping that he would ask her with him. He wouldn't do it. And he would say, yeah, come with me. But he seemed half-hearted about it because obviously he's got this killing thing. He goes out to Utah, and Liz's girlfriend is like, yo, the killings have totally stopped here, and now they're happening where he's at.
Yeah.
So they're like, fuck, let's go call the police. And if you look at what's going on in Utah, you got Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, Lauren Amy, and then these are all disappearances. And then Carol Durant, she's 18 years old. It's in Utah. It's in a mall. She drives a red Camaro up into the parking lot and is approached by a guy who pretends to be a rent-a-cop. And she's like, hey, or he rather says, hey, your car, there was an attempted break-in. Can you come and look at your car and check out that it's okay? And by the way, can you go get in my VW Bug while we're at it to come down to the police station?
Yeah, hold on a second though. But he like says that he's a police officer,
Yeah.
and she's like, "Can I see some ID?" Because apparently she had some like kind of like, nah, this sounds
Yeah,
shady.
Well, he smelled like alcohol, she said.
yeah. So she was like, "I would like to see some ID." Unfortunately, he did actually have ID.
And so she's like, oh, you must be a cop then, because you act like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So he impersonates authority, or he does his whole like, "I'm injured, please help me," and Those are his two most common, I think, ruses.
Doesn't she like hit him? Doesn't she to get away?
She
jumps
gets away.
out of the car. He gets one handcuff on her.
Yeah.
And she's like freaking out. He puts a gun to her head and he's like, I'll blow your fucking brains out. And she's like, well, just fucking go ahead and do it,
I'm
dude.
gonna die anyway.
Seriously, you're just fucking gonna kill me, cut my head off and fuck my eyeballs, you know? So just do it, you know? And she jumps out of the car on the road. There was another car coming the other way, and she flung their door open and jumped in that other car and was like, take me to the police station. And nobody fucking believed her.
No.
They did. They were like, no, it's not this guy. They had him walk out in a lineup with like law enforcement. He tried to change his look, and he did. He was really good at changing his looks. But she was like, that's fucking him. And everybody was like, no, come on.
It's
you got
Ted.
the wrong guy. He's a nice guy. He's a good
Ted.
boy.
Come on now.
She knew.
She was like, no, there was a lot of
Man, they
pressure
didn't
on
believe
me
a young woman. What a surprise.
to say that it was somebody else, and I got it wrong, and it was him, and I was going to stick to my guns, and this is what gets him. This is because she got away.
Yeah, because that's what ends up getting the attempted kidnapping later on.
I think later on she does actually pick him out of a lineup, but it wasn't a physical lineup. It was a bunch of pictures, and she goes, that was the guy.
Yeah, because she knew.
Yeah,
she
knew
wasn't
exactly.
the one who was doubting. It was all law enforcement.
Because
it can't be Ted.
They
He's
actually
such
got information from Liz back in Washington because she called and said, hey, my boyfriend looks like that, and he was out here, and now he's out there. And so
but he's not a Charlie Manson type. He's a
law student.
Yeah.
You can trust a law student.
Yeah, he's a professional looking guy. So
and he gives a prison interview right away. And he's like, I didn't do this. Look, I'm going to defend myself. Well, actually, I think he did have a lawyer there because his lawyers, they really drilled her. And they were like, are you sure it was him? You know, you sure? Couldn't have been somebody else? It had to be somebody else. It was somebody else.
Yeah, so Duran, she sticks to her guns, and she's like, no, it's definitely him. He's the guy who tried to, kidnap me and clearly tried to murder me with the gun and everything. And basically what ends up happening is that this culminates in the whole trial in Utah in which he is found guilty of attempted kidnapping. This what gets him excommunicated from the Mormons, as we mentioned back at the very beginning. But before he's actually, found guilty, he had gone back to Seattle and Washington, had seen Liz again, and of course Liz by this point has now called into the police 3 times and been like, yo, I think my boyfriend Ted is
she keeps seeing him every time that he comes,
apparently
and says that all the fears melt away when he's in her presence.
No. So apparently the last time, it was actually, there was some even bigger red flags. She had talked about cutting her hair, which was long and parted, and he was like, no.
He's like, you got to keep your long hair.
Yeah, there were some other creepy signs, and apparently it's in, I think, 1976 that they pretty much end their relationship. So it's on the downswing up there. I'm pretty sure at this point she's a little bit too certain.
And it's so creepy that the letter that I opened up with, the love letter from prison that he sends to Liz, with every long hair beauty, I will love you, he says.
Yeah, so,
every one of his victims.
Liz isn't totally stupid. So, she's okay, I'm not totally 100% feeling this anymore.
Yeah.
But, not only does he visit Liz, though, but he also goes to Colorado and Idaho, I believe, in which he, again, unfortunately, continues to murder these young women, and he's doing that. He gets, back in Utah because he's a law student there, and that's when you have the trial in Utah in which he's found guilty of the attempted kidnapping. But meanwhile, while all of that's going on...
Well, he takes a vacation to Aspen.
Well, so...
a working vacation.
Well, he had been up there, and yes, he did murder some young women, but what ends up happening is that after he's found guilty down in Utah, they basically extradite him to Colorado, because in Colorado, there is a murder charge on him. And so obviously murder trumps attempted kidnapping. Yeah. So they extradite him up to Colorado for this murder charge.
There was Carolyn Campbell. I know that. And then there was a ski instructor. Ted, you had the ski instructor's name, right?
That was Julie Cunningham. And she's murdered much the same way that the other ones have been murdered. So there's a definite link to Ted. And that's where he gets extradited back to Colorado to stand trial for her murder.
But before he does get extradited back, he kind of helps with his own defense. And he's like, yo, can I go to the law library, in the middle of the murder trial?
Yeah, in the middle of his trial. He's allowed to.
And there's a fucking window that's open, right? So he hops out. It's right next to the Xerox machine. He hops out the fucking window. He said he practiced.
Yeah, he thought about it. He practiced.
Jumping.
Bracing himself on the ground for the
jumping
jump.
off the bed, the second bed, and jumping off onto the ground to see how how to brace himself.
And he lost like 25 pounds because he had nothing to eat. And like he found a VW bug with the keys in the ignition. What luck, right? So
and this is the thing that I don't understand, and maybe it's because like I grew up like in the 90s and like, you know, but like I never understand the whole idea of leaving your keys in the car. Like,
well, in case Ted Bundy wants to borrow your car for a week,
it's always apparently a thing in the 60s and the 70s, and I'm like, why are you leaving your keys in the car? Like that just seems stupid. But
he lost 25 pounds. He couldn't fucking eat. And you know what? They put a roadblock up, and in the first 2 days, like Bundy doesn't leave because there's only like 2 ways in and out of Aspen, and Bundy, they don't catch him, but they search every single car, and they got like 200 pounds of fucking weed in 2 days from just people having like dime bags and joints.
Nowadays, you're good in Colorado. It's totally legal.
Well, back then, they were like, well, we didn't get Ted Bundy, but Ted Bundy got a whole bunch of weed arrests in Colorado. People have been smoking weed there for a long time, apparently.
But yeah, he escapes from, like, the law enforcement was like, oh, it wasn't my turn to, like, watch him.
That's what the guy said.
What?
They were like to his lawyer, have you seen Ted? It wasn't my turn to watch him.
Like, what the hell? Like, this is your job. Like, you have an attempted murderer here. Can we maybe, like, keep eyes on him? And it's just like, apparently not. So, like, he escapes there. But, like, he's out in the woods and it's freezing. Like, it's cold. It's Colorado.
He got like one meal because he broke into somebody's cabin. He got like one meal and one night's sleep. That was like a decent night. And then he like grabs a car and they pull him over like on a traffic stop.
Yeah, so he gets rearrested and obviously put back into law enforcement's, custody. So like that's his first escape attempt, which honestly, the fact that you have to say first escape attempt.
And this is crazy. This is a guy that's left a trail of bodies across the country. He's the most well-known serial killer that there is. I mean, other than, I guess, maybe Charlie Manson at the time, who was locked up. But he is going across the country, doing all this crazy shit, and he escapes like fucking twice, not once.
Again, not once.
And it's
but
not even
twice.
that much longer later. It's like
for
less than 6
murder.
months.
They're holding him for murder.
But the deal was with the second escape, it was pretty devious.
It was New Year's Eve.
This is the one where he lost like 30, 40 pounds. He became almost emaciated so he could fit out of a fucking hole in the roof.
Squeeze his little ass through a 12-inch by 12-inch fucking square hole.
He literally like walked out the door of the prison. Just like walked out.
Well, it was New Year's Eve. He waited for them to serve him food, and he was like, all right, as soon as they'll see me, and then I won't eat the food, I'll fucking escape.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but he climbs through the roof, and apparently above him was like a worker who works at the jail, or so he just took his clothes
Some
and was
fresh
dressed
clothes,
as
walked out the front door.
Law enforcement, somebody who works at the jail, and then that's how he walks out. Because like the first escape attempt, he's only missing for 6 days, which still is way too long. But still 6 days. Whereas this time, I mean, the second one, like he's gone for like over 46 days.
Oh, that's where he heads on down.
And did you see like when they arrested him the first time and brought him back, like when they apprehended him, like he's even got a great personality then, even though he's tired and he lost 25 pounds and isn't fucking eating anything. They're like, how you doing, Ted? And he's like, well, I'm back.
Yeah, it's way too like
nonchalant. Like,
it's way too nice and like
he's smiling and shit. You know he hasn't eaten for a week.
Like, no, come on, people. But yeah, the second time he gets out, he goes on this like long circuitous route, and he basically ends up in Florida.
Yeah. He goes straight to the sorority house and murders every fucking buddy in. Well, not everybody in it, but he would have probably wanted to.
I think he took a trip like South Florida, like Miami.
Well, he went a couple places first. When they interviewed him, he said he went to Ann Arbor, Michigan. He was hanging out at a bar there, and then he was going to the beaches in Florida. He's like having a vacation while he's...
you remember the manhunt? That was
not out on bail, but he's... Say again?
There was like a nationwide manhunt for him. Like everybody's looking for him, obviously.
Everybody's looking for a VW bug because that's what he's going to steal next. The same fucking car he's always driven.
He's taking buses and trains on his route down to Florida and
instead of going to Mexico and changing his name to Juan, let me go murder more girls at a sorority house. When Ted Bundy shows up in front of the sorority house with a gas can and crutches, you might want to get the fuck back in the sorority house.
Well, obviously those those young women do not know that this is Ted Bundy. Like, they don't know that, like...
They don't know.
So he's straight down. He's down.
He's down in Florida. Yeah. He's been up in the Pacific Northwest for most of these murders, and so
and he went to the weather too. Yeah. If you look at it,
nice weather.
He waited for the first escape for it to be spring so that they would have the window open.
Yep.
And then he jumps out the window. And then this time it's opportunistic because it is New Year's Eve and they'll be busy. The guards will be a little bit more busy and sidetracked. He escapes and he's like, fuck, it's cold. Let me go to Florida. Where do I go? Florida.
And also Florida was on the exact opposite end of the country.
Yeah.
Like to go from like Seattle and like, up in Washington, like you're up in like the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Now all of a sudden you're on literally the opposite end of the United States down in Florida.
But instead of going like crossing the border to Canada or Mexico, or not committing any more murders. What does he do? He goes and gets a room right next to this fucking sorority house. He goes to the bar right next to the sorority house. He steals like 21 or 23 fucking credit cards from people, which I guess was pretty smart because he wasn't using the dead people's stuff. He was just snatching credit cards so he could use them for his room, for food, for whatever. This is where he takes that girl out on the date that's across the hall from him while he's like stalking the sorority house, and he doesn't leave. He goes in the sorority house. He attacks 4 women there. Can't stop himself, but a couple blocks later, breaks into another place, attacks another girl, 5 on the same night. And this is just him, I guess,
out of control. I mean,
being starved,
addiction,
being starved for this that he couldn't do the whole 6 months he was in prison.
Yeah, this is, I think, the compulsion to like commit the crimes. Like this is taken over.
It just unravels at this point.
I mean, the beginning of it was spending time with the corpses and laying with them and fantasizing. He just beats them and runs away and then beats someone else. And he left. Basically, 2 of them die. But the other 3, he would have been pretty sure that they were dead from the looks of them. They had almost fucking died. They looked like they were dead.
Yeah, and I mean, even shortly after that night, I mean, you have his last known victim, at least in Florida. You have 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, who he also kills, and
right outside her middle school, I think he snatched her up from. And he wouldn't talk about her. They think he felt remorse for her.
Well, she was a 12-year-old girl, so I mean,
I don't think it was remorse. I think it was more along the lines of there's something to be said for being a serial killer, killing women, and being a child killer. If you're going to prison, it's like, no, you don't want to be
necrophilia is fine, but
necrophilia is okay.
Seriously, if you're in prison, I'd rather be known as a necrophiliac than a child murderer.
No,
or child
but
rapist.
he killed women. Though.
Yeah, I know, but I mean,
everybody in prison has a mother, let alone like sisters and nieces and friends that are female that they know.
It's a lot different to be a child killer in prison.
But when they know in prison that you are a rapist, you're in trouble.
Yeah, but you're even worse if you admit to a child.
It's worse.
Yeah,
no.
That's far.
I agree.
It's different
actually, even being a rapist
it's another
is one
level.
thing.
It's a whole other level.
A lot of them are rapists in jail.
A rapist isn't I won't say isn't a big deal. That's the wrong word, but
they have to separate them all the same, or they'll get beat the fuck up because everybody has a mother, and that could be your mom, that could be your daughter.
Yeah, but I still think there's more of a risk if you're a child rapist or a child murderer. That's the worst. The worst. Thing.
All right, Vince tells us get on with it.
Yeah. I was gonna say, wait, can we like cut? Can we cut most of that because it just sounds weird that you're like, oh, it's a problem because like this is a woman and like
you're
that's
right.
your mom.
That was
like,
too much.
Just sounds like
that was too much on it. Let's.
As like the woman in the room, I'm gonna put it like like that sounds weird. So
in the editing, maybe
we'll leave that out.
Maybe trim it down at least. Maybe trim it down. Maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Let's just leave it that like obviously admitting to
or trimmed,
raping and killing a child. Is
bad.
Is bad. But yeah, it's in Florida that he ends up getting arrested and charged with these murders. And he ends up having basically 2 trials. One for the sorority girls and then another one afterwards for the
other girl,
Kimberly
the little
Leach.
smaller girl.
And he becomes such a celebrity serial killer. The press eats him up. It is spectacular almost. Like the story, you can't watch fucking Dexter on HBO or any of these other horror movies and expect any more excitement or entertainment. I mean, even when the cop arrests him in Pensacola, Florida, like there's a fucking chase. There's a struggle for the cop's gun. The cop has to cold cock him with his gun. There's a big old welt on his face with it. He gets into custody and then he fucking acts as his own lawyer. And it is insane because a lot of lawyers are like, all right, they're talking shit because he doesn't have a full law degree. He's taking some law classes and he knows just enough of how a courtroom works to fake it, I guess. And obviously he's his own defendant, so he's going to do his best job with it. But he's such a fucking narcissist and eats up this press spotlight. He has press photos. I don't have fucking press photos. Jim Morrison has press photos. I don't have press photos. He gives interviews.
This is the first time that television really basically covers a trial. Like this is the first trial.
This is the first
that's
televised
really,
trial.
Yeah, this is the first time this happens.
Yeah, they have cameras in the courtroom, everything else.
It's like a newsroom, the whole court.
Yeah.
Yeah, you even see in some of the documentaries, like the news people, like they're trying to figure out how to even like have all these different technological devices, like trying to report and capture all these images, because this is the first time that they're doing this. So like this is the first publicly covered trial.
And the judge tells him in the end what a tragedy it is that he is not going to be able to practice law like in front of him. Not that he's fucking sawed girls' heads off. That is the tragedy, but the tragedy is that he's intelligent and he won't get to practice law.
Well,
it's
that
so
he
fucking
threw away
crazy.
his life.
He threw away, yeah. I think he was more referencing that.
I was gonna say, though,
what he
his-
could have been if he didn't do what he did. What
I
he
was
could
going to
have
say,
been.
yeah. So, I mean, this
But he
judge's
enamored
remarks.
people. People just, I mean, they would have had more disdain for somebody that looked clearly guilty, and he had people fooled.
Yeah, I mean, the judge's remarks apparently are very polarizing. I mean, a lot of people are like, what the hell, man? Like, you're being, like, very, like, gracious to, like, Ted Bundy of all people. Though other people also are like, hey, he basically just said to Ted Bundy's face that, like, you are a waste of humanity.
Exactly.
And, like, you could have been a great person, but instead you did this. And he just did it politely. So there are some controversy surrounding how his remarks were intended, though obviously upon first listening, you're kind of just like, this is Ted Bundy. Like maybe you're being a bit too polite about it. Like, but yeah, like that's included, in the different movie depictions.
You can
And- 'cause this-
re-gift dead girls' jewelry after cutting their heads off, and people will be polite to you if you
Well, during-
have a good enough personality.
But was all that wasn't
The power
found
of
out?
personality.
But that wasn't found out.
Yeah,
for that
at this
trial.
point, they still
didn't
have
know
the
about the
Pacific
cadavers and the
Northwest.
fucking
Yeah, the
skulls and everything.
necrophilia. Like
That
there's
comes
nothing.
later
Just all the
on.
dead girls in the sorority house.
Yeah, just the 3 girls
Just
in the
the,
sorority
yeah, the
house.
two. It was two girls who died,
Two girls.
right?
4 attacked, 2 died.
Two
Yeah,
died.
because it's two that like, and I mean, even during this trial, people are. You're right though. They are being charmed by him to the point that like you have some of these young women basically going and writing him love letters and all this type of attraction to him. And he is found guilty, obviously, of killing the 2 young sorority women. He basically, it kind of hinges on the dental records,
Yeah,
basically.
the
I
bite.
mean, yeah, the bite marks. They're like, well, these are his teeth,
Yeah.
which have been found with bite marks there. So this is clearly
gotta be
you.
him.
Yeah, so he's found guilty of the 2 murders. He's also receives 2 death penalties.
Death penalties because of it.
Yeah, and even after that, so like this is the first circus trial basically. So like with all the shenanigans involved of him as co-counsel, firing his lawyer, all that. But then he has a second murder trial in Florida, in which that's the murder trial of for Kimberly Leach, and it's during this one that he's also found guilty. And this one, there's actually a bit more hard evidence for because there was a witness. They found fibers like matching his clothing in the car, and they found her body and all that type of stuff. But he gets found guilty, of her murder, and during this trial, he also receives a third
Death
count
penalty.
for death penalty. So he ends up with 3 death penalties in Florida. And this is with the 3 murder charges down there.
Now, when I was researching this, I felt almost guilty that it was so fucking entertaining in a way. And I felt like this is almost like season 1, 2, 3 of Bundy. Like, it just doesn't fucking end. I mean, because even in this second murder trial for Kimberly Leach, he doesn't stop amazing people and shocking people with what he does. He's defending himself, and he calls Carol Boone up to the stage.
Right. Yeah.
And
Oh,
she
Jesus.
is somebody that he worked with at the crime prevention unit, right?
All the way back in Seattle, Washington. So this is way, way back.
The biggest defender he's got. She would spin for the press for him, and he calls her up as the only witness, and he's like, "Will you marry?" He proposes to her on the stand
In front of the
That
judge
was-
with
at
that
a
was
murder
legal.
trial
Yeah.
on television.
of a 12-year-old girl, to be clear.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that was that trial. Okay.
Oh, yeah, it was that trial.
swooning
All right, I
over
wasn't
him.
sure that was the trial.
She accepts
Yeah, so they get married
on stage
in the middle of a murder trial.
In the
He
witness
already
stand.
has 2, death penalties on record and
Yeah.
everything. But
The crazy thing is, though, I think it was his
Mama Bundy Papa Bundy and Baby Bundy.
I think it was the notoriety that he's getting and the kind of how should I say this, the confidence he had in himself, because the
maintained his innocence the whole time.
Yeah, but because of that was probably his downfall, though, because in the first trial with the sorority house, he was given the option of pleading guilty and given
there was
life
a plea
in prison.
deal. Yeah.
And he could have taken that, and that would have been it. But he didn't. He felt for sure that he was going to get away with it.
But would that have included all those other things that he had done?
No, not everything.
In the other states, no.
But
And
like
definitely
in
not
Florida,
the other girl.
Yeah.
But I mean, for those two, he could have gotten, life in prison.
But he knew he had other bodies.
He was so confident,
Yeah.
and he wasn't going to admit that he had done
Exactly.
something wrong. Like
But
that
like I
wasn't.
said-
And she believed in him all the way up until the end, like right before it was like bones for time. Then he's like, all right, so maybe I did kill a whole bunch of women. And then she was like, fuck.
They were divorced in
Yeah.
1986.
Yeah, they
just
did.
to be clear.
But they weren't allowed to have conjugal visits, and they wound up just having sex anyway. On death row, they go have a baby Bundy, Rosa.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anything about Rosa's.
Well, Rosa clearly changed her
Changed her
name
name,
and
yeah.
is not being, doesn't want to be related.
But why doesn't she write a book like his ex-girlfriend did?
No, absolutely. I don't blame her. Rosa's like, no, I don't want to talk about my father.
Start a
in
Probably never
clothing
really
line
knew
like
him anyway,
Pablo
so.
Escobar's
Yeah.
kid did. Use the notoriety of the name. It's an anti-notoriety, but
So-
anti-fame.
So he's in jail. He gets convicted on both the sorority counts and the 12-year-old girl
Lychee,
count.
yeah.
And he's in jail. He's on death row for about 9 years.
Yeah,
And
it's
there's
almost a full decade that
Yeah.
he's like on death row.
And he's trying to, towards the end, he's trying to get a pushback by what Britnee said was the bones for time, trying to confess to more and more killings so that way they keep him alive longer to find out where the bodies are buried, basically.
Yeah, and even during his death row. So not only is he like married and like he has a child while he's on death
And
row.
he's like Hannibal Lecter listening to classical music while they interview.
He's also working with like basically like the early behavioral unit at like the FBI
Yeah.
and like helping them with like other like
actually-
nice
Yeah,
the
serial
Green
killers.
River
The
Killer
Green River
in
Killer actually helps him
particular.
to get the Green River Killer.
And
Yeah, he's
he
talking
tells
to
them that
psychologists.
they'll go back to the crime scene.
Yeah.
And he had gone back to Healy's crime scene to grab her earring and her shoe while the cops were all there. And he said, look, we go back to our crime scenes.
Yeah.
We just do. We relish in that shit. He questioned that one witness, as a matter of fact. And he was like, describe my crime scene to me, please. I mean, he didn't say my crime
Oh
scene.
Yeah.
my God, that was like such a huge red flag. Like
Yeah.
if you're the jury, I'm like,
And they showed the jury, they had footage of them just like shaking their heads like, what the fuck?
because this is so. Just to be clear, this was during the first murder trial in Florida, in which Bundy is acting as his own counsel, and he basically, decides to cross.
It was the only one he cross-examined. too.
Cross-examined one
And
of
he's
the
like,
police
tell me all
officers.
about the dead body.
Yeah, and he just
What
like
were
goes
your
into
impressions of the dead body?
explicit detail in which like everybody is just like, what?
They're even
Like,
vetoing him, and they're
even the judge is like, all right,
what's
it's
the
time to
word?
move
What's
on.
the
Like,
word? It's not veto.
Overruling?
Objecting. They're objecting to him, and they're saying this motherfucker's already asked that shit, and he's like, all right, tell me the position of this limb instead, and he's still going on about it. He won't
Yeah,
stop.
so he's giving all these kind of like interviews, but always in the third person because he's still not admitting that he had murdered anybody or that he had done anything wrong or like nothing like that when he's on death row. So I mean, like he
Right, a couple
maintains-
reporters got a book deal. Like he couldn't get
Yeah.
the book deal, but they got a book deal to get his story, and he agreed if they would reopen his case and examine it. And they were like, well, he's not telling us about the killings. So they were like, hey, Ted, man, you know more about these killings than anybody. You're like an expert witness. Tell us hypothetically.
Right,
if
hypothetically, if-
there was an individual out there with the entity, as he called it, that would overcome him and make him
Yeah,
do
I
it.
mean, some of his phrases are
Tell-
like terrifying.
Yeah, it's Dexter's Dark Passenger,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's also
the entity.
reminiscent to OJ with the book, If I Did It. I mean, come on now. So,
I didn't know he had that
yeah,
book.
he did.
Fuck.
He basically admitted to killing her
What
and then
the
said, if
fuck?
I did it, this is why I do it. And he explained exactly how she was killed.
Yeah, so
And
he-
this is what Ted Bundy does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he talks in third person. He's
Yeah.
exactly like you just said. He was like, well, if the person was going to do it, this is how they should do it, and like goes into all these details. And it's just like, okay, well,
This
clearly
is the
that's you.
progression of where it would have
Yeah.
went to, and this is where it would have started. And I wonder where it would have went to hadn't they caught him. It would have just gone
Would've just kept going.
spiraled even
He
worse.
wouldn't have stopped. I
Yeah,
mean,
no.
he's like, he's not, I mean, some serial killers apparently
stop.
can stop.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, it's a false conception that they can't.
Yeah.
Like, some of them have, but he wouldn't have been one of them.
No.
He would have just kept going.
Would he have gotten cabins in the woods to keep the victims alive longer? Like, we don't know these things, like where that disease, or if we want to call it a disease, where that fetish addiction
Obsession.
to murder would have taken him.
Yeah.
It would have taken him to more heightened extreme levels.
But basically what ends up happening is that all the stays get
Denied.
exhausted.
Yeah.
Like they decide like, no, you're not going to get a free pass. Like you're going to be sent to the electric chair. And, so I mean, in the last couple of days leading up to that, I think is when you kind of have, at last he admits to murdering, I think we said, what did we agree to? Like 30?
It was 36 or 38. And he said, additionally, oh, but you can add a 0 to that as the true number. So
Right,
it's,
he,
it's what, 300 or 100? Like, because he said that he would capture and release women to practice and to keep his hunting skills up to par.
Yeah, so he acknowledges that he killed 30 some women in multiple states. He confesses this about 2 nights before his actual execution, that he was active from like 1974, he said 1978, though in other testimony, like before this, he had said something different. So again, Ted Bundy, he's a liar. So it's hard to tell whether that's true or not. But like, this is when he admits to like the necrophilia and like decapitating the corpses and bringing the skulls home. And this is when he admits that like he buried some bodies out in the wilderness. So I mean, this is kind of that 2 night before confession when like he at least admits to some of it, but he still doesn't take responsibility. He always, so like even though he just confessed that like he murdered 30 some women, he still is like, but it's not my fault. It's not my responsibility.
It's society's fault.
Well, he had like a
gave
whole
me
list.
too many choices.
Yeah,
if things were more rigid, if I lived in Nazi Germany, I would have been a great commandant at a death camp, because he would have been, right? He was very ordered and he was very brutal.
Yeah, so he blamed he blamed the absence of his father. He blamed his abusive grandfather. He blamed like the fact that his father was concealed from him. He blamed law enforcement, TV, alcohol, porn, the media, society itself. And then a couple times he blamed the victims that they apparently looked afraid, and then like he had to go ahead and like attack them as a result. So I mean, pretty much if you can think of something, he at least blamed it once for his actions. So he never took responsibility.
But his mom loved him. She came to the trial every day, and she said he was the best son in the world.
She loved him, but even up to 45 minutes before he was executed, they're still asking him questions about bodies and murders, and did he have responsibility for it. They asked him about New Jersey and Ohio, that there were girls' bodies found in New Jersey and Ohio that kind of matched his killings.
Yeah, there's a bunch of...
And they asked him about it, and he said no. But that was 45 minutes before he said to be killed. He's still giving interviews saying, no, that's not me, that's not me.
Yeah, so
and there was speculation. Britnee, you have some of this, right?
Yeah,
about
so I mean,
the Philadelphia area.
Yeah, there are a bunch of like murder trial, or not trials, but murder cases where he's, people have suggested that he might have been him, at least here in the Philadelphia area. He apparently, at some point when he was on death row, had given interviews that like he had killed 2 people while he was in Philadelphia. And so, some people have put
Atlantic City, right?
Right. It was like outside Atlantic City, like, because while he was attending Temple University, people had said that, he had said, at least in one interview, that it was, 1969, and that he might have killed Susan Margaret Davis and Elizabeth Perry, who were both 19, and that, they were on the Garden State Parkway outside of, near Atlantic City in New Jersey. Though, he said, like you said, Ted, on right before his execution, he was like, no, I didn't murder them. So again, it's unclear whether he did or he didn't. But
and again, he's a pathological liar. So.
Exactly. So it's hard to tell like whether that's the trait. But there are multiple cases where it's things like that, where he admitted, like in one interview, that, I killed somebody while I was up in Vermont looking for who my father was, up at the unwed women's home. And there was a murder of a young woman up there that he was up there around the same time. And so people have been like, all right, well, was that you? And then like sometimes he was like, I killed somebody while I was up there. And then other times he's like, no, it's not her. So it's like, all right, well, did you murder somebody there? And it just wasn't this individual. But like there are a bunch of cases like that where he may or may not have been the murderer. And, they actually, in 2011, they got Ted Bundy's complete DNA profile, and they basically added it to the FBI's DNA database for future reference for any of these kind of like unsolved murder cases that he may or may not have committed that we don't know.
And they did tap him while he was in prison too. The FBI didn't have really like a database or a training center. And at Quantico, what they did was they put one together and they interviewed over 30 killers, him being one, Charlie Manson being one. And they said, like, you know, help us learn about the mind of a serial killer. We want to know how you evade law enforcement. We want to know how you think, what motivates you, what drives you, cause and effect. And he did help him. I mean, at first he was like, yeah, well, what am I getting out of it?
Yeah.
But then I think the narcissist in him just wanted to help regardless, and they knew that. Maybe. But he did. He
Either that or he viewed it as a way to push off the execution date. Just keep pushing it off.
But eventually that fails.
Yeah.
So in January 1989, he is sent to the electric chair.
I remember when he was executed.
Did you?
Yeah. I was, 16? Jesus, I'm old. But yeah, I remember that. I remember the crowds cheering and everything else.
I saw like that was shocking. Like I didn't realize that it was like they had like pins that they were giving out to people, and like it was a huge party.
Burn,
like,
Bundy, burn. And they were selling T-shirts, and everybody was out there drinking, hanging out. It was like college students who were probably kids and didn't remember like any of the murders.
But it was funny, Joe, because you mentioned his mom and that she loved him and he was the best son. One of his psychiatrists actually talked to his mom at the end of the trial, or towards the, or actually leading up to the death when he was put to death, and she told the psychiatrist that she just can't wait until it's over. So even at the end, she didn't want him. So it just goes from her not wanting her when he was born to her not wanting him around at the end. So
well, would you want him around after that?
No, but I mean, it
after everything,
it does explain a lot.
Because the reporters, they felt a responsibility to go to his mom's house.
Yeah.
And here, listen to this. This is your son. That's your son's voice, right? Yeah, it's your son. Listen to him confess. And then she was like, would you guys like some pie and ice cream?
But yeah, it was like the whole like party going on outside, it just kind of reminded me how like we were talking like in previous weeks and previous episodes when we were talking about like how all these crowds would go and watch, these individuals be executed in this extremely violent manner. Like it was a huge crowd. Like this was like the same thing, except for it was like in the 1980s. And you had T-shirts now.
When he saw the electric chair, he was freaked out, and then he calmed down, and they put him in it and asked him if he had any final words. It wasn't very prophetic. He just said his very final words were, "Give my love to my family and friends."
Yep.
Yeah.
And then he was fried.
So they executed him. They ended up cremating the body.
Did they cremate him?
And Britney, tell us what they did with his ashes.
I was really freaked out about this.
Jesus fucking
like,
Christ.
I'm hoping that this is wrong. Like I hope I don't think
wrong.
it is, but like I want it to be wrong because from what I understood, they took his ashes and he wanted his ashes to be spread
in the place where he had the most enjoyment of his life.
Right, up in the national park. Yes, up in Washington, which has the remains of his victims still in it.
And they did it?
Yeah, apparently, which is just like, obviously, like if you're being optimistic, you're like, he meant like his childhood when he was camping and hanging out with other kids.
I thought that they were going to spread him down that river where he always went rafting with Liz and Molly. And no, that's not.
I mean, that's the optimistic view, but I mean, it's Ted Bundy. So I mean, I think it's at least half fair to think that like he meant the other half of his life. And it's just like you put his remains in the same park where his victims' remains are still. Like we couldn't not do that. Like
we couldn't put him in a dumpster, piss on him, and then fucking put him in a block of cement and chuck him down to I don't know.
What the fuck? Why is his remains in the same park that his victims' remains are? Like that's
I mean, I guess legally, if it's in his will, I mean, you have to.
Apparently, that's how it works. As we know from doing
can't say no.
Doing our serial killer tour here in Philadelphia.
Jesus,
because there are other legal documents that murdered serial killers.
You still have
in their will have to all right, strike that last little bit of what I said because I was fucking up.
I didn't know that, Britt. I didn't know they dumped his ashes there. Wow,
it's crazy.
But so I mean, if you're looking for more Ted Bundy, then which is. If you're looking for more, there's obviously been documentaries that have been recently released. I mean, there's the Ted Bundy tapes on Netflix. Netflix also has the extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile movie with Zac Efron that was in 2019. There's, the capture of the Green River Killer in 2008 has him. There's Bundy, an American Icon from 2008. There's a movie from the 1986 with Mark Harmon as the deliberate stranger, which he
makes sense
portrays Ted Bundy. So there's been numerous books written about him too. Obviously, you have, probably Anne Rule, who had been, had been a friend back in Seattle before everything happened. He had worked with her in the crime prevention. Crime prevention or the
crime
suicide?
prevention or suicide prevention?
Yeah,
Crime prevention
All right,
unit.
but I think it
is
was the
what
suicide hotline they were working on together.
Yeah, that was part of it.
So she wrote, a biography, The Stranger Beside Me. So she wrote one. Liz Kendall obviously wrote a book, The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy. I think she's also involved with the Amazon Prime documentary, Falling in Love with a Serial Killer.
Oh, in a big
was
way.
also-
She's the central character of that.
Yeah.
Also, that was the Zac Efron.
Yeah, it was from
portrayal.
her point of view.
From her point of view, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been multiple books and films and documentaries about him.
There's actually a real good podcast, and I think it's relatively recent, called Interview with Evil. And that's the one with the recordings from him with King County in Washington, where he actually admitted to saying, this is what I did, this is where they are. That's his only first-person interview in which he admits to killing the girls. So that's a really good podcast. I think it's about 8 sessions long, basically. But you hear him in his own words saying, yeah, I did this. This is what I did and everything else. So it is kind of like, it does make the hair stand up on your arms. Like, oh my God, this guy's actually saying he actually did all this.
So plenty of films and books and documentaries and even videos that are on, like from the recordings from the trials are all available online today for any listener who wants more Ted Bundy.
Yeah. And he was no fan of Philadelphia, though.
Why is that?
When he was here in the springtime going to Temple in 1969, he said he left Philadelphia because he said that Philadelphia was, quote, too violent and dangerous for him.
Motherfuckers threw batteries at him like Santa Claus.
And we just got done beating up Santa Claus, so he's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here.
He said Philly was too dangerous. Yeah.
Philly was too violent and dangerous. And I'm always like, well, if it's too violent and dangerous for a fucking serial killer, what are we normal people supposed to fucking do?
Never been prouder of Philly.
Respect Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out, Ted Bundy.
Bad things happen in Philly. So.
And Ted Bundy recognized that. All right, you have been listening to Grim Dark Histories, Folklore, and Anthropology. And once monthly, or about that, serial killer motherfuckers analyzed for mature audiences. I am your R-rated history professor and global studies professor, Joe Wojie. My co-host, Britnee Smith, historian, as well as Ted Sisco, also historian too, playing the part today of Ted Bundy for all murderous purposes. Make sure to subscribe, rate, review us, and it'll help us bring more content to you. Support us on our Patreon at grimphilly.com/podcast if you want to be especially awesome and take a live serial killers tour with us here in Philadelphia, or dark histories tour, or ghost tour with any of these beautiful motherfuckers that you hear on this podcast, that you can book on the same website, grimphilly.com. Most important, tell a friend and just keep listening.
I was found here. You come around.